Well, Pennsylvania's governor signed an executive order today aimed at reducing gun violence in his state. The move comes after 6 Philadelphia police officers were wounded in a shootout Wednesday. Police say that Maurice Hill used an assault rifle when he fired more than 100 shots at the officers. In a news conference this morning, Governor Tom Wolf said his order was a long time coming.
The executive order I'm signing is not an impulsive decision made in the wake of the recent mass shootings. Rather, it's the result of months of work by my administration, working with partners to find real, tangible solutions that focus on reducing gun violence, on reducing the number of people killed and terrorized by guns in our Commonwealth. The Second Amendment does not supersede the inalienable right we all have to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Every human being, every Pennsylvanian is endowed with these rights, and it's my duty, and it's all of our duty, to protect them for every Pennsylvanian. That's what this executive order is all about.
Well, earlier, Philadelphia's police commissioner gave an exclusive interview to CBS This Morning national correspondent Jericka Duncan about his role in ending this week's shootout.
It was a harrowing experience for me.
Philadelphia Police Commissioner Richard Ross was right in front of the home where the gunman opened fire.
They shooting at the cops.
His officers came under siege for more than 7 hours.
I normally would not be right there with SWAT. I would be in a position of command and overseeing, but the minute you have police officers trapped, it's a different mindset for me.
Around 4:30 p.m. Wednesday, a gunman ambushed officers serving a narcotics warrant and barricaded himself inside. 6 officers were shot and 2 others were trapped in the home. All of them survived.
When you look at those injuries, someone grazed in the head, someone shot in the hand, someone shot in the leg. What are the chances that 6 officers walk away from something like this?
I'll just sum it up this way. God is good. He just is.
Commissioner Ross says he spoke to the gunman several times, urging him to surrender.
What did you say to him?
I was trying to appeal to him about his newborn daughter. I talked about my family, my daughter, about what it's like, and I kept telling him that to me, and I mean this, the most important title that I have is Dad. And so I just kept talking about that.
Coming out.
Just after midnight, the suspect finally came out with his hands up.
How much firepower did he have? How many guns?
Well, we know we had at least 2. We ended up putting in tear gas to flush him out. And so he comes out with 1 gun on his person. That's bizarre in and of itself.
Do you worry about the amount of access civilians have to guns like the ones you were up against yesterday?
I always do. And I know that in my heart, we can do better in this country.
I want to bring in John Micek. He's the editor-in-chief of the Pennsylvania Capital Star, and he joins me now from Harrisburg. So, John, today Governor Tom Wolf pointed out that the man in yesterday's shootout had enough ammunition to hold officers at bay for 8 hours. In an op-ed piece, you write that banning weapons of war is what you call an assault on common sense. Can you sort of explain that?
Sure.
I'm sorry, not banning these weapons, you say, is an assault on common sense.
Sure. Rena, we saw in this shooting in Philadelphia the other day, we saw in the shooting in Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh last year, shooters armed with assault weapons capable of firing off many rounds of ammunition, the same in Dayton, the same in El Paso. There is no compelling reason for a civilian to own these weapons, nor is there a compelling reason for them to have access to that kind of extended magazines or ammunitions. The only purpose, it's not hunting, it's not self-defense, it's for death and destruction, and there's no logical reason for that to be allowed for civilian population.
So can you break down sort of what the governor's plan is and what he wants to accomplish with this executive order?
Yeah, it's pretty far-reaching. In fact, about a dozen separate actions across state government. A lot of study and research being called for here. A couple of task force and special bureaus, both within the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency and the State Department of Health, calls on the Pennsylvania State Police to better track hate groups and white nationalist groups, calls for increased efforts towards suicide prevention. The governor also has called on the legislature to enact red flags and expanded background checks. It's pretty far-reaching, and I think signals also the governor's frustration after nearly 5 years in office now of no substantive action by the legislature, even though we've been seeing more and more of these shootings.
We know Democratic Senator Bob Casey also said yesterday the Senate's got to move on a ban on weapons of war. But the gun ownership rate, we looked this up in Pennsylvania, is about 27%. How much of an appetite is there for this kind of legislation in Pennsylvania, especially when you look at maybe rural voters?
Yeah, Rena, I mean, there's a long history of hunting in Pennsylvania. The tradition of gun ownership is one that is deeply embedded in rural culture. It has been traditionally quite difficult to get any sort of gun control bill through the Republican-controlled General Assembly. The state got its first new gun law in 14 years earlier this year, with a Republican-backed bill that would require those facing protective orders and those convicted of domestic violence offenses to more speedily surrender their weapons to law enforcement within 24 to 48 hours rather than 60 days, which was previously the case, which should signal kind of the institutional resistance there has been for many, many years to any sort of new gun regulation. And I should add, this is not only a Republican issue. We have a lot of rural Democrats who come from Western PA and Northeastern PA, where that same culture is kind of embedded, who've also been resistant to some of this stuff.
We've also learned the House Judiciary Committee is going to return from recess early to consider gun safety bills. But as we've seen, state and local governments push their own legislation. Do you think that's going to ultimately be more of a state and local leader push to have a bigger role potentially than Washington in making laws that are specifically on gun restrictions?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think this executive order today is a signal of that frustration with Washington's inability to act. I should also credit the chairwoman of the Pennsylvania Senate Judiciary Committee, a woman called Lisa Baker, a Republican from Luzerne County, who's actually going to hold 2 days of hearings this fall, September 24th and 25th, on a broad range of gun control and gun violence measures. She did not close the door unilaterally and has an open mind about this, which is actually a fairly encouraging signal, I should add. Senator Baker is known to be deliberative, so that's actually a pretty good sign here in Pennsylvania.
All right, John Micek, so grateful you could join us to break this all down.
Anytime.